Whoa, it has been an absolute minute until I've sat in the set. It feels good to be back. Today we're gonna be talking about cold weather filming, how to care for your gear if you're shooting in the winter. At the end of December, Chris and I premiered our latest film, Bluebird. It's a 160-kilometer backcountry skidoo documentary where we try to make it through the backcountry on sleds for the first time to the Western Brook Pond Gorge with our friend Lewis, who was basically our guide. We shot this film over about 4 days in the dead-ass winter in Newfoundland in the backcountry. And during the premiere, there was a lot of questions about how did you care for your gear while you were shooting the film? What did you do to make sure that it wasn't shutting down? And were you worried about condensation, water damage, etc.? So I'm gonna talk about some of the things that I like to use, some shooting tips, and some things that you can do to protect your gear. The first thing we should talk about is what camera are you using? Chris and I use Sony full-frame mirrorless cameras, and there's a couple of reasons for that. We really love full-frame cameras and obviously the features that these cameras have, but one of the main reasons is that they are dust and weather sealed. I'm not too concerned about getting things on my camera, in my camera. We have taken our cameras in the rain, in the snow, through the renovation. Yes, they get dirty. Yes, they look worn. Yes, they need to be cleaned, but we've never had an issue with our cameras to the point where we've had to send it in because they broke due to moisture. Something like a more entry-level camera body probably isn't going to have this, so they're going to be more susceptible to dust and water damage, so you had to be a little bit more careful. So you might want to double check that your camera has some kind of weather sealing. If it doesn't, then you're gonna obviously want to take more precautions than what Chris and I would normally take. But with that out of the way, let's talk about battery management. Cold weather and batteries do not mix. Cold weather will drain your batteries so much quicker than when you're in the summertime. So if you're going to be out shooting in the wintertime, you're gonna want to make sure you have a lot of extra batteries that are fully charged, and then you're gonna want to try to keep them warm somehow. So we're always storing our batteries in this Nomadic Peter McKinnon battery case. I like this for a couple of reasons. One, it keeps my batteries organized. They come with these indicator stickers, so you can put, red stickers on the bottom of your camera batteries so that when you put them back in the case, if this one is dead, I can put its sticker up so that if I open this, I know what battery is dead. I usually have 6 fully charged extra batteries, not including the 2 that are in my cameras. So I have 2 of these. So for Bluebird, I kept one in my chest pocket in the bib of my snow pants, and that zipped up so they weren't gonna fall out. The other case went in the front of the snowmobile. The snowmobile has this kind of like small storage compartment up kind of close to the engine. That's where I put my second one of these, so that was kept warm as well. So I didn't have any issues with my batteries draining really fast. It wasn't overly cold. It was between 0 degrees Celsius and -7 degrees Celsius. I would definitely recommend keeping them on your person instead of in your bag. Second thing we should talk about is condensation. I've never had any issues with condensation ever. I've had a little bit of like fogging on the lens coming from outside in the snow into a kind of a warm car. But if you give your camera time to acclimatize to that temperature, it usually goes away. After an entire day of shooting, you're gonna wanna make sure that your camera bag is fully open and you take all your gear out to dry out. Let everything kind of come to room temperature to dry out. If you keep that camera bag closed and there are things that are kind of damp inside, like it's just not gonna be good for your camera gear. So just open it up, let everything air out. While you're shooting, there's a couple of ways you can keep moisture off your camera gear. Snow and rain getting on the lens is a huge hassle, especially when you're shooting, obviously. So a lens hood will help keep some of that snow and rain off of the lens. I always carry a pack towel with me in my pocket when we're shooting in conditions like that, just so I can keep my camera dry. If water splashes on my camera or it snows on my camera, I can just quickly kind of wipe everything down so it's not gonna seep in. All of the little accessories I talk about in today's video are gonna be linked in the description box below. Full disclosure, they are affiliate links, and any revenue that we kind of make from that helps us make more videos on this channel. So if you're out and it's snowing and you're not shooting, keeping the lens caps on your lenses is also going to help cut down on moisture on the lens. Protecting your camera. When I'm shooting out in the wintertime or in the rain, I don't do anything to protect my camera. So I am a terrible person, but that's not for everybody. You might be really worried about your camera, and that's okay, right? We all use our camera gear in different ways. They're tools, but obviously they're really expensive, so you don't want them to break. So if you're gonna be bringing your camera out in the direct snow, something like this plastic bag can be really helpful. This is just a camera rain cover, basically an open-ended plastic bag, right? And so you put this over your camera, and then you can cinch this down onto your lens, and that's just going to protect your camera from getting wet. It's kind of shaped like this. I haven't used these yet, but I do have them in the bag just in case we are out shooting, say somewhere around salt water and it's spraying everywhere. That's definitely one place I am a little bit more cautious about my camera gear when I'm around salt waters, because that will actually corrode your gear. I've also taken a grocery bag, punched a hole in the bottom, gaff taped that to a lens hood, and tossed that over the camera, and that works just as good. There's a lot of things that you can do to mitigate risk when it comes to bringing your camera outside. Something you're gonna wanna keep in mind when you're shooting in cold conditions is that your LCD screen might actually freeze. The first time I saw this, Chris and I were shooting at Niagara Falls. It was, I think, minus 20 Celsius. Everything was icing and there was this mist falling all over my camera. Everything was freezing and the back of my screen started looking like really slow motion, almost like I had my shutter speed set too low. It was like blurry. And that's when I realized, oh my God, my LCD screen is freezing. So if you start to see this kind of weird motion blur and your shutter speed is normal, then there's a high chance that your LCD screen is freezing. Really don't know how to combat that other than, you know, bring your camera out of the freezing conditions. Did not have that issue during Bluebird. I guess it depends on how cold it actually is. The cameras do have ratings on how low of a temperature you should actually be taking them out. I'll put on the screen here what Sony recommends is the lowest temperature for the a7S III. So you might want to double check again with your manufacturer to see what the lowest temperature you should be bringing that camera out in. And if you're in the market for a new camera and you want to be shooting out in conditions like this, consider doing a bit of research to see what camera does best in colder conditions. So that's how to care for your camera when you're shooting in the wintertime, but I wanna share some shooting tips as well. When you're shooting in the wintertime, the dynamic range is gonna be really challenging, whether it's a Bluebird day where you have bright sun, blue sky, and a blanket of snow. That snow is going to be so bright in comparison to your subject. Conversely, if you have an overcast day and your sky is white, your snow is white, then that's a lot of white on camera. So you're gonna really wanna make sure that you don't overexpose that white snow. This is one of the reasons why we shoot S-Log3 to capture the most dynamic range in a scene as possible, and this is super helpful when it comes to shooting in the snow. If you want to learn about how to shoot in log, we actually made a video a long time ago, I'll link it up here, where Chris teaches you how to set up your camera to shoot S-Log, and then using our custom Sony utility LUTs to convert that log footage to Rec 709. So you can check that out up here, and I'll leave the LUTs in the description box as well. The second thing you're probably going to want to do if you're shooting in the snow is to actually set a custom white balance. It can be really difficult to color correct winter footage in post if you're not setting a custom white balance. You're gonna want a nice neutral shot, and then you can obviously add your color grade on top of it to make that snow maybe lean a little bit more blue. You know, we talked about the camera getting cold, but you're probably gonna get cold too. So a couple of things I do to keep myself warm. I like to bring those little hand warmers. I'll keep them in my pockets. And then of course, wearing gloves is gonna really improve your experience shooting outside, keeping your hands and your fingers warm while you're holding onto that camera. During Bluebird, I used these gloves from the Heat Company. They're basically small gloves that you put on that have these little pockets where you can stick those hand warmers. And then I have an insulated glove that goes on top of that. The tops kind of zip off, exposing your fingers, and the thumb comes back as well. So you can kind of handle your camera. And these gloves are really great in really cold conditions where you want your hands fully covered from the elements. I wore just the hand gloves most of the time, but it did get really cold on that second day where we were trying to reach the gorge and the wind was just cutting through my gloves, and I had that top layer on. So it was really challenging to film. So if you are shooting something important and you know it's gonna be cold and you know you have to wear gloves, practice handling your camera equipment wearing gloves. Now, if you're not gonna be shooting in conditions that are really, really cold like we were doing at Bluebird, then you might want to consider picking up a pair of actual photography gloves. So I have a couple of pairs from ProMaster. I have these knit versions, and then I have another like fully black version. So the cool thing about these gloves is that they do have a little pocket on the top. But what's nice about these gloves is, unlike the liners from my Heat Company gloves, these ones you can actually take your fingers out, so you have full access to your camera and your fingers. So it's a lot easier to man your camera with these gloves on because your fingers are out. Pretty warm. I had them on over the weekend. It was just below 0 degrees Celsius. I was working outside and my hands were perfectly warm. You can build a fire and then of course, you know, cover those fingers up when they're getting cold. They're not that big, they're not that cumbersome, and they are definitely comfortable when you're shooting in the cold. If you haven't seen our film Bluebird, I'll link it up here. It's a 49-minute documentary, and hopefully that inspires you to get out there and shoot using some of the tips in today's video to protect your camera and keep yourself warm. All right, thank you guys so much for watching, and we will see you next week for another one. Man, it's been a minute since I sat down to camera and it feels very rusty.